right?
Yeah.
Yep.
They've got
Our way.
this is movies for young.
All right. Good morning. Let's call the April 16th, 2019 meeting of the Scott County Board of Commissioners to order. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The agenda has been distributed and published, and it looks like we have two amendments to the agenda. Agenda item 10.1 and 10.4 have some small revisions. So
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
thank you.
As amended, Madam Chair, and I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as amended. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right, we'll move on to the minutes. The minutes of the April 2nd, 2019 County Board meeting were included in your packets. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the April 2nd, 2019 County Board meeting. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign.
I abstain from that vote.
And Commissioner Beer will abstain from that vote. Thank you. Motion carried. Next on the agenda is the time where we recognize interested citizens. If you're here and you have a matter you'd like to discuss with the board that is not on the agenda, we invite you to come up to the podium. We're limited to 5 minutes per person or subject. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
You.
John, how are you?
Very good, thanks. Appreciate you guys. How you doing today? Good morning.
And if I can get the overhead to shine on my thing, and then I can begin.
And just one housekeeping, I will keep the time and I'll give you the countdown so you know,
Sounds good,
so you
Dave?
don't have to,
Yeah.
then you know where we're at.
Good morning, my name's John Miser, and I kind of wanted to share with the board why I come here. I've been coming here since 2017, and a lot of times you wonder why. So it's really, when I talk about my son, Tyler, who's 12, I haven't seen him since he was 4.5, essentially. I've been a victim of an attorney-devised divorce strategy that legally stole $2.5 million from me and stole my son. 18 months ahead of starting this divorce, my ex-wife was advised by an attorney to hide assets. And then to create and her attorney was a convicted inmate whose idea thought it was okay to take $500,000 from her own relative. So she advised my wife, hide your assets, call a false 911 phone call, and get the guy out of the house. Now you'll diminish his reputation before court. All designed to steal my premarital wealth and my son. 8 years now. With a 4.5-year-old kid does not see his dad. Then I ran into a de facto judge, Carolyn Lennon. No promise to uphold the law, never took her oath. Swayed by Pamela Green to issue order after order. De facto Lennon hammered me with order after order, and she had no promise to uphold the law. 3 corrupt women, Lennon, Williams, Green. Green was an inmate, served time. Minnesota legislature mandates that if a public servant failed to take or file an oath, they'd lose their office. That's a fatal error. They would need to run for office again if they wanted to hold the office. Public servants, as you know, aren't qualified to hold any duties until they actually qualify. Let's take a look at Carolyn Lennon. She was elected in 2010. She was to have taken and filed an oath January 3rd, 2011. No oath was taken that day, no oath was taken that month, no oath was taken in 2011, no oath was taken in 2012, until my attorney noticed her in 2013. She took an oath and then filed it surreptitiously. She now thought she was qualified, that she could take a vacant office. 751 days. Let's put that into perspective. 751 days. I know my friend over here, Mike Beard, was a representative in the House of Representatives. That's 730 days, a term of office, 2 years. Mike could have gone a full term without ever taking and filing an oath. I watched all you folks take and file an oath before you even voted on the minutes you wanted to be authorized to act. Yet I've asked the question, what is the time period prescribed? And nobody will tell me. I've noticed everybody, county attorneys, chief judges, Supreme Court, appellate court, all bar attorneys. Nobody will answer that question. So how far would you go for your son? I finally thought, you know what? I need to figure out what's the difference between right and wrong. So I looked. Congress said the Bible is the Word of God. Imagine that. They said the Bible, and President Reagan signed into law. Well, if that's the Word of God, in God we trust, one nation under God, he's got to be the highest authority on what is right and wrong. And he said, I'm going to show you the key of knowledge, John. The key of knowledge is what lawyers possess. Woe unto you lawyers, for you've taken away the key of knowledge. Ye enter not in yourselves, and them that were entering in, ye hindered. What is that key of knowledge? What is that key of knowledge? Well, I figured it out. I'm going to show you the key of knowledge. The key of knowledge is identity fraud. The key of knowledge is appearing to be versus just being. We all know it's impossible to be two different beings, but lawyers know this. They know the key of knowledge. Now up here, you guys have said, hey, you're a person, you're a person. Well, if birth registration is the way that you become a person, those kids on that photo aren't persons till they hold a birth certificate. In this report put out by the United Nations, it says, birth registration is the first step to establish the existence of a person. Birth registration establishes a person before law. What? I thought I existed. The birth certificate is a creation of the state. But you're not allowed to put any biometric data on it because it's a creation of the state. You can't put pictures on a birth certificate, you can't put fingerprints, you can't put a footprint on it because it's a creation of the state, but you can appear as it. So you go down to get a driver's license and say, hi, I'm pretending to be a creation of the state. So here's the last slide, and I'm probably right on time. I'm not a birth certificate, therefore I'm not a person, which a birth certificate establishes. So at best, I can only appear to be a person. I can't be a birth certificate or a person. The key of knowledge that lawyers possess, Ron and Michael and whoever attorneys are in here, lawyers, know this. They know it. So I've just given you the key of knowledge, which is the highest authority in law, God says. There it is. And I just want to let you recognize that I'm not a person. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And I have more if you would ever be willing and want to know about this fraud. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meiser. Any other interested persons to come before the board? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is Scott County Delivers. Our topic for the month is public safety, crime, and prevention. I believe Chris Harder, our quality improvement manager, will get us started.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you very much. I'm personally really excited about this presentation this morning. It is the first time that we have been able to bring together data from the County Attorney's Office, the Sheriff's Department, and the Department of Corrections to look at kind of this state of crime statistics and also some crime prevention activities here in Scott County. Because it's the first time we've pulled this kind of data all together in one place, there's likely there are going to be as many questions as answers. But I think it's a really important developmental moment to start looking at how all this data comes together and how it might inform our work going forward. As you all know, we have a strategic planning meeting in 2 weeks, And so we're hoping this is a little bit of a preview or a preparation for that as we get into some of those final conversations about goals and objectives as well. I'm going to ask first that the panel folks introduce themselves. Then I'm going to ask our presenters to introduce themselves. Carrie Lorenz is going to take just a few minutes to do an overview, and then we'll move into questions. So with that, let's do some introductions.
Hi, I'm Himani Joshi. I'm currently a senior at Shakopee High School, and I'm here as a CAPS intern, and I intern in quality improvement with Ms. Harder, and so this is a really exciting opportunity for me.
Troy Pint with Enterprise Business Technology.
Danny Lenz with the Office of Management and Budget.
Evan Cole, I'm a management analyst for Health and Human Services.
Scott Retke, I'm the Assistant Jail Administrator.
Adam Peary, I'm the Chief Deputy at the Sheriff's Office.
Jill Cron, Scott County Attorney's Office.
Mike Gross, Scott County Attorney's Office.
Carrie Lorenz with Community Corrections.
Yeah, thanks,
And sure, as Chris indicated, I'm just going to kind of give a brief introduction to this. We were excited as well to get some of this information together. Just to highlight a little bit of the information we did pull, we looked at, County Attorney's Office pulled information regarding felony cases by city, gross misdemeanor cases by city, and then we also spoke with our court administrator who was able to pull information regarding filings with the court, and in particular major criminal case filings, and then also we looked at our drug case filings, which, I mean, you can kind of take a look at the numbers which we've highlighted with our treatment court presentations as well, just with the increase in those drug court cases. I'm trying to think what else really. So yeah, that's just basically the information that we pulled together.
Thanks. All right.
All right, I'll start off. So I'm looking at page 11 and 13. We have our annual average daily population in the Scott County Jail going to our lowest rate in 5 years, and the average number of days going down also over the last year. Can you expand on some of the factors that go into those numbers dropping down?
I know, I guess the short answer is I don't know the answer to that question. There's not, you know, from the jail's perspective, I mean, we are at the mercy of the law enforcement side and the court side to dictate who's coming into us and who's getting released from us. I know, specifically looking at timeframes recently, I mean, things are, as far as the average daily population, I mean, it is fluctuating from year to year. There are a few spikes that we can certainly account for. Maybe we boarded prisoners for a few different years here, and so I know, as an example, in 2014 and in 2017, we housed prisoners for other counties, and so you would have a tendency, and those numbers were large enough where they would impact the average daily population. But as far as understanding why our numbers are going up and down, I mean, I would be more inclined to want to defer that question maybe to the county attorney's office or law enforcement side, just to see what's impacting that. I guess I can't say.
I think one of the things that probably is impacting the average number of days confined is, I think the courts are doing a good job of getting the inmates seen and then adjudicated in one way or another, so they aren't spending any longer than they need to be in the facility.
I would agree with that. The courts really control that because of the sentencing they do. There's been a marked reduction in the amount of days people are sentenced to jail for, especially for drug cases, especially with an emphasis on treatment and treatment court. People aren't going to jail for 30, 40 days for drug cases, especially the lower drug cases like fifth-degree drugs. And it's also correct that the judges are trying to decrease the amount of time people spend in jail pre-trial by releasing people sooner, called RPR them, released on a personal recognizance.
And I know for releases, we have seen an uptick in people being put out on alcohol monitoring devices and different alternative ways to get people in and out of the facility faster. I know, since we worked with, the new vendor for those services, I mean, that process has gone smooth, and I think it's made us more efficient that way, so it would certainly seem that would impact, days confined, absolutely.
If I could jump in also with the courts and the county attorney's office and the emphasis of decriminalizing mental health with the drug court. Now we've got a vets court just starting up. There has been an emphasis with the judiciary and the county attorney's office to seeing the people that have mental health issues, get them in and out of jail as soon as possible and get them the treatment and help they need, rather than having them sit in confinement, because it's been proven that that's time spent in confinement doesn't really do anything, doesn't affect the recidivism at all. So there is an effort on both parties' part to move those people on and get them the help that they need.
So are there formal programs to move people into treatment, as Mr. Hocevar was explaining that? Are there furloughs or release to treatment, or what are the processes to help get people into treatment as opposed to jail?
I could speak just from the treatment court aspect and then also reentry. With treatment court, there's certainly an emphasis on trying to get people assessed as quickly as possible, getting Rule 25 evaluations, either that through the county or through the Haven, and really an emphasis on not, whenever possible, trying to release them and get them into treatment right away, or release and put them on EHM or some other community-based monitoring. In addition to that, we do also have a half-time position that does reentry stuff. So we have a person that will go over to the jail, help with some of those applications, and start making some of those referrals so that if they are able to be released, that can go smoother.
Can I just ask one follow-up question to that, Carrie? With some of the things like EHM and some of those other tactics to be able to get people out, do we have a way to know, are those folks like released and safe in the community, or are those folks released and committing additional crime? Do we have any information about that?
I don't think we formally have pulled any statistics with that, but I can just speak, if there are issues, we do have mechanisms to certainly bring people back into custody, whether it's on a warrant or an A&D, which is an apprehension and detention order. And that could happen for not only treatment court individuals, but also people that are put out on conditional release or as part of their sentence. And then I know the jail does release people as well to EHM. I don't know if your process differs from ours, but.
No, and it's much more minimal, and they have to be sentenced, and so process for that. I do think too, when somebody comes into custody, I mean, they can request to get that assessment done, and so we oftentimes are facilitating people coming into custody and just asking the question about how can they get associated with treatment court, or they have begun to hear about it now, and so they know that it exists, and so we really try to push people in that direction whenever we can.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just ask a follow-up question about kind of that reentry piece or the transition piece of people that are being released from the jail? On slide 17, there's a chart about employment and maintaining employment while on probation. And looking at this chart, it seems like 2018 was quite a successful year, and I'm just kind of wondering, what are the reasons behind that? Is that related to the economy, or is there something else going on there?
I think, yes, that definitely. I think we are definitely finding that certain offenders we've had before that have had difficult times getting employment, maintaining employment, some of those barriers aren't there. There's certain employers that are more willing to hire people that are convicted felons. So that's certainly part of it. And I know our probation officers' efforts just to really hook people up with the workforce center and other supports to help them gain and maintain employment. I know that's definitely been an effort that's been kind of for a while now, but within the last 3 to 5 years, I'd say, more of a focus. And we do have, again, the reentry coordinator has done some work as well, just to try to build some relationships with community-based places that we can
refer offenders to as well.
Besides employment, are there other major barriers that you find when you see people that are charged with additional crimes? Or are there other things that got in their way?
Housing is a huge barrier as well, and a difficult one to tackle, to be honest. There's just not a lot of resources out there. And it's, yeah, the market at this point in time, there's a shortage of housing.
On the same page regarding the data, I was wondering, so we can see the clear increase, especially since 2012, where it was just 10% below the target of 55. My question is, how is that target of 55% determined?
Are you referring to page 17?
Page 17 still.
Yeah, that's a state.
A state. So then my follow-up question to that would be, when we see the performance increasing, what has the organization done to help kind of explain how it contributed to that change?
Like I said, I think part of it is just the economy at this point in time in the job market, as well as trying to build those informal supports with community-based places, as well as having like the workforce center and other options for offenders for educational things on how to answer questions with resumes, just simple stuff like that. Housing, the job fairs, just having those resources in our office, we're able to hand those out to people, and I think they're attending those as well.
Jumping back to page 13, so it's the average number of days confined. Do we have a breakdown? Is this day sentence, the average day sentencing, or is this confined including time before they're first in front of a judge, or is this the time when they're arrested until they see a judge? Can you explain that data a little bit more?
Sure, yeah, the average days confined is just simply the day, the length of time before release. We do report data to the Department of Corrections, and they help us calculate out sentenced versus pretrial. The vast majority of the jail population is pretrial, vast majority of the population. And so most of the jail sentences that we see now are very short. They are finding a lot of alternative sentences, like Mike and Carrie mentioned, as far as most of what happens is somebody comes in for pretrial, they stay for a long time, especially if it's a felony, and they're going to prison. And so they'll be here for a long time, and so that is what, makes the number go up. But from a quantity standpoint, most people are in and out because the courts are, RPRing people or finding alternative ways to get them out,
So diving into that a little bit, so the averages could be skewed. So if you have a felony where someone's going to court, it might be a little while till they get to trial. Does that skew the data? So I guess what I'm looking for is your typical person who's booked into the jail, how long are they sitting in jail before they have that first appearance before a judge where they may be released on their own recognizance or have monitoring up to an actual trial date? Do we have data like that?
Well, we know, the courts tell us that they have to be put in front of a judge within a certain amount of time. So we know, and it's a kind of a strange calculation for a 36, 48-hour time frame before they make their first court appearance, get to their bail hearing, and then are released. And so we know that people are getting in front of the judge within 36 or 48 hours, which again, that's a sort of a strange calculation, but yeah, they're getting in front of that within that time frame.
Do we have any data on the numbers of people who are held for 36 or 48 hours who, once they go before a judge, they're being released immediately on their own recognizance or monitoring?
We do not track people who are released right after bail hearings. No, I don't think we do.
One last question about page number 10 here. Do you guys have any indications or gut feelings how our maybe neighboring larger cities are doing with our cases of outside residents, like say you're like Lakeville or Chaska? Are they going to be comparable to our larger cities, or is this really our event venues driving driving those numbers?
I don't have any information on how it would compare to outside our county. We don't have any statistics on that. You do see that event areas do increase the amount of gross misdemeanors and felonies occurring in that community, as you can see from the statistics.
So just a follow-up on that, because the event venues really kind of seem to be a big driver in this measure as far as tracking felony and gross misdemeanor cases. And just looking at that information, is it your sense that if we didn't have those event venues, that crime would still exist, it would just go elsewhere and it would occur at a different location? Or is it kind of a situation where there's something about having the event venues and drawing people together that it creates opportunities for crimes to happen?
Well, it certainly does create the opportunity. I mean, people go there because of the entertainment venue, the ability to gamble, and other activities. We get many controlled substance crimes out of those areas, specifically Mystic Lake and Prior Lake.
And again, we're playground of Minnesota, right? Got Mystic Lake, Renaissance, Valley Fair, Canterbury. People come here to have a good time. And when you have groups of people that gather, crime happens. When you have groups of people that gather where there's a lot of money, like at Mystic Lake Casino, crime happens. People go where the money goes. Where there's money, there's drugs. Where there's drugs, there's crime. So those venues absolutely drive up the crime rate.
Is there also an impact of the entertainment venues themselves having their own security and video cameras that they're watching things, and that they're partnering with law enforcement agencies and able to catch the crime that does happen?
Yes, Mystic Lake security and the Mendawakatan community are very helpful, cooperate with the police department. I've always had good cooperation with them when I've gone to trial and getting surveillance video and having their personnel come and testify. The fact that they have thousands of cameras out there and are able to record almost everything at the venue is very helpful, especially in drugs and assaults. And in addition, they record all of the actions at the tables so we can discover frauds and thefts. So yes, they're very cooperative and very helpful.
Are there some other efforts around addressing or reducing instances of crime in some of the other venues besides Mystic?
Well, yes. Mystic Lake obviously is the biggest venue we have and the most, but the racetrack also has crimes out there concerning drugs and thefts, and they also have surveillance and they have security, and they're very helpful. The Renaissance Festival, they also have security and are cooperative. But there's not as much activity, what I would say, at the Valley Fair as, say, at the casino.
We have talked, as we were preparing for this, a lot about what it means for county resources to have such a high percentage of the people we're dealing with be out-of-county residents. And I wonder if you could speak to that from your office standpoint about just the resource that goes into that and how that's different for out-of-county versus in-county residents.
I can start from the probation end of things. When someone comes through court and is sentenced to probation, when they're in county, it's obviously we're able to supervise them and help facilitate resources. When they're an out-of-county resident, we have a process in place where we're able to transfer that case, the supervision of that case, to whichever county they reside in. The difficulty in that is at times, people don't have stable residences, and so we're not able to transfer those cases. And so that makes it difficult for our probation officers just to supervise and be able to facilitate some of those services and conditions of probation that those people have to complete. In addition to that, when someone's sent to prison, everything then is going through the Department of Corrections. When someone is done with their prison stay, they're released on what's called supervised release. And when they have another county, or a residence in another county, that county would then be able to take that case. However, if they are sent to prison on a case from Scott County, we are what's called the county of commit. And then if there isn't a stable residence for them to go to, they may come out here homeless, which obviously we don't have shelters here. There's not a lot of resources here, so that as well can make it difficult. There was a recent change in the DOC's policy regarding that, so that if there's someone that had a residence in another county 6 months prior to their incarceration, then that county would be the county of historical ties, which is new, which is helpful for those people in particular that end up in our county that don't have residents here. Those are just some of the impacts that we run into in probation.
Well, in our office, it's our duty to prosecute crimes that occur in Scott County, and that includes people who live here and don't live here. So we're going to do it. If we find that it's justified, we're going to prosecute them.
I would say, for our office specifically in the jail, it's, due to the shorter length of stay, people that are maybe suffering from mental illness, for instance, you know, we do what we can to work with Human Services to provide them services while they're at the facility, but due to that compressed time frame, it's more difficult. It causes stress on the jail staff as well as Human Services to try to get that coordinated in a short amount of time. And then the question comes in as to what type of services are we going to provide someone that doesn't reside in Scott County. And I know that we've been working with Human Services to try to come up with some plans for the future to try to figure out how exactly we can provide services to the people that need it, either while they're in our facility or once they're released, to get them in a better place so they aren't continuously coming back to the jail.
I don't know if the presentation actually went into juveniles or not, but a lot of people don't realize this, but when a juvenile is prosecuted, they commit a crime at Valley Fair, say, someone from Eden Prairie commits a crime at Valley Fair, a juvenile, we prosecute them here. For as far as the disposition, what happens to them, they get sent to a Hennepin County court, juvenile court, for that disposition to be handed down. So we don't deal with that. So if a Prior Lake kid committed a crime down Minneapolis, they would prosecute them, but they'd be sent back to this county for actual disposition.
Going back to page 17, the adult offenders on probation, maintaining employment. Do we have any data on the pay that these people receive for this?
We don't.
You mentioned housing issues, and we realize that we have some issues with housing, especially affordable housing. And I just kind of wonder about the way we sentence them. Does that create additional barriers for them to get employment that can lead for them being able to get stable housing in the county?
Yeah, potentially, sure, yeah. We don't have it, we don't track, we just track whether they're employed or not. We don't track salary at this point, or wage.
Do we do any tracking of their housing circumstances? We're obviously, when you're talking to them, you realize, do you have stable housing or not? But do we do any tracking of that to see where they're at or anything?
Yeah, not formally. We track whether they have housing or not, but then obviously with the probation officers working with people are working more individually around the circumstances for that housing.
I'd like to turn our attention back to page 2, under what's working well and why. And something that stood out to me was that the sheriff's office has hired a crime analyst to support different investigations, and I was wondering how that has changed the time and/or process for different cases that go to trial.
I don't know that it's changed the time necessarily, but our crime analyst is highly trained in specifically tracking trends and doing kind of those searches for connecting the dots through an investigation, which typically in the past had relied on the investigator to do that, who hadn't necessarily had that training. So she's allowed us to increase the information that we have on a certain offense or offender, and then pass that information along to the county attorney's office for prosecution. And I think, Mike, it's been fairly successful. I think the work product they're getting is probably better than it has been in the past when it comes to kind of that analyst point of view. She probably looks at things a little differently.
I found using her in 2 recent first-degree homicide cases that it's very helpful to our office to have somebody close hand and not depend on going to the BCA. She was very helpful in those prosecutions and where the defendants were sentenced to life.
Yeah, the crime analyst has been extremely helpful. It's also important to realize that although she works for the sheriff's office and under the sheriff's office as the boss, but that crime analyst works for the whole county. Other law enforcement agencies throughout the county call on her to help them with their cases also. So she's not limited to Scott County Sheriff's Office cases. The sheriff shares that resource with all of Scott County.
And her name is Laura Weger, by the way.
So one thing that stands out, and obviously this is part of a national conversation, but the criminal drug case filings having gone up dramatically over the last 6 years, over doubling. Obviously, our treatment court doesn't handle 987 treatments every single year. What can we do to either provide more resources or something along those lines to look at alternatives or diversions to addressing some of this, these drug cases where it is addiction-based or something along those lines?
Diversion, Ron?
That's a tough question, Mr. Lenz. Obviously, there's talk pretty much every legislative session about what to do with drugs. Just a couple of years ago, they've moved a small amount of drugs for 5th-degree drugs down from a felony to a gross misdemeanor. This probably helped as far as the confinement rate, that you've looked at the decrease in that. That would have helped that issue also. There's also always talk about decriminalizing drugs, right? I'm never going to sit here and tell you that's a good idea. I think it's a terrible idea. Until the legislature makes changes, my office is obligated to follow the law. If they're caught with drugs, we will prosecute. Obviously, drug court has been a great asset to us in decriminalizing the addiction part. We deal with high-risk, high-need offenders, which I think is great. I was skeptical at first, I'll be honest with you. They talked me into it. I looked at the data and came on board. It works. Other than expanding that, which is extremely tough in our situation here in Scott County. We don't have the room, we don't have the judges, we don't have the courtrooms, we don't have the resources, either with the county attorney's office, probation, or the courts. So minus the resources, we keep going along doing what we can.
I thought it was really interesting. If you look at the last page, page 19. So this is data we've been looking at for a long time, and that recidivism rate for those felony offenders has been fairly static, and that's true in Scott County, that's true statewide. And then in 2018, we see a little bit of a difference, and in the narrative, there's some connection, there's some possibility that that is connected to the increase in the drug cases. And so I'm just wondering if you have other thoughts about, are there other things that have been a challenge for probation and corrections around the recidivism rate? Or are you pretty solid that it's related to the drugs?
I think that's definitely a piece of it. I think there's, multiple things we struggle with. I think we struggle with having people, again, stable housing, as well as the mental health pieces as well. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of being able to access resources. The data for 2018 started with the 2014 because the 3 years, so that was prior to treatment court. I don't know it'll be interesting to see if that does impact the number. I know Tim did reach out to the Department of Corrections because they compile the data for the report. And they had indicated that for whatever reason, in 2014, within the first 6 months, there was a larger number and percentage of recidivism in those individuals. And then obviously that compacted over the years. So it'll, you know, to say for sure, I don't know. Those are just some things that we struggle with. I know just, again, resources as far as programming for offenders, whether it's treatment, whether it's mental health, those pieces as well. And just honestly, with the housing stuff, it's difficult at times to just keep people stable enough to be able to get them for jobs, that kind of stuff.
I'd like to touch on maybe just a somewhat forgotten piece of this, or maybe not, but could you talk a little bit about just through the whole process of a crime, going to jail, being on probation, what the victim's role is through that, and are there ways in which the victim is engaged to work with your agencies as sort of a case progresses, or even after the fact, like restorative justice type things that are in place where the offender can work with the victim or in some way be accountable more directly to the victim rather than like the system as a whole?
Well, I know when somebody is charged with a crime, especially when there's a victim element such as domestics or assaults or even thefts, our office writes the victims letters, tells them when the next hearing is going to be, ask if they need restitution, they want to make impact statements, and we invite them to come to court and let them know at all times. They have the ability at sentencing to address the court or tell us what they would like to say, and we would tell the court before sentencing. We often ask for restitution when they're sentenced, and that's part of their probation, is to pay that restitution. Also as part of what we often make the defendants after conviction take domestic abuse assessments and go to treatment if it's recommended, or anger evaluations.
Yeah, and from a probation piece, especially on the domestic cases, those probation officers are reaching out to those victims, providing contact information should they want to reach out. We also, there's resources like Southern Valley Alliance. There's also a victim person through the Shakopee Police Department. So depending on where the victim lives and just resources that they would be interested in. And then also, obviously, we're monitoring for the restitution payments and then apology letters, just different stuff like that. We will do too, as far as when we do a pre-sentence investigation, in addition to the county attorney's office, we'll reach out to those victims as well. If they haven't made a victim impact statement through the county attorney's office, then we would offer that opportunity through the PSI as well.
And after their sentence, if they're ordered to pay restitution, they usually are put on a payment plan, and if they don't follow up on that, they can be violated and sent back for a probation violation hearing and get more sanctions. So that's, probation monitors that and makes sure that they're continuing their payment, and there could be consequences if they don't pay.
There's a specific statute that grants victims' rights, the victims' rights statute. There's 3 people in my office that make sure that we're complying with that statute, that keep in contact with victims the whole way. And as Mr. Groh indicated, that what the information that they're provided. And each case is so completely different that we have to make an assessment right at the beginning of the case, how this victim needs to be dealt with. Some are extremely helpful and cooperate fully. Others are on the defendant's side, and we have to deal with that. And some require hand-holding through the whole way, and some are completely disengaged and you can't even find them. So each case that has a victim on it is, depending on the nature of the case, could be completely different, but we comply with the victim's rights statute and keep them involved as much as they would like to be involved.
From our perspective, at the time of arrest, we work with several organizations, Southern Valley being one of them, So if we arrest a party on a domestic assault, the victim is then put in contact that evening, day, whatever, at that time with an organization like Southern Valley to provide those support services right from the beginning.
When you look at slides 8 and 9, so looking at felony cases and gross misdemeanor cases, are there trends in that? Are there certain things that worry you as kind of experts in your field? Are there particular types of crimes or particular pieces of that data that make you concerned, or that your offices are talking about as data that draws your attention?
I think for Prior Lake, obviously, the Mystic Lake Casino
Right.
drives up the numbers. I mean, that if, to be completely honest, if the casino wasn't there, there wouldn't be nearly the number of crimes that are committed out in Prior Lake.
Right.
But as indicated before, yeah, that type of environment, that kind of money, it draws an element.
Yep. So really, there's no particular type of crime. They're not particularly like overly concerned about burglaries or DUIs or anything like that. It's really just driven by those entertainment venues.
A lot of it's driven by the entertainment venues because that's what starts the process, but because people are drinking at the casino or at Canterbury, that goes to DUIs coming down back and forth from on 169. Drugs, obviously, both, every venue, we've had drug crimes that we prosecuted out of. And you know, it's not just the venues, we have drug crimes throughout Scott County without the venues, but the numbers are there because that's where the people are. The greater number of people, you're gonna get those kinds of crimes. But the traveling back and forth on 169 and the various freeways and streets in and out of Scott County, the DUIs are drinking at Canterbury, drinking at Mystic Lake, could result in that. You get those people together, assaults happen.
Okay.
I would like to take us again back to page 2, and I have a question that has to do with, because I'm a member of the youth community, I found particular interest under the crime prevention area, where it mentions that there's been an effort, especially from the sheriff's office, in community engagement. And I was wondering what initiatives the office has taken to foster those positive relationships with both youth and adults alike.
Yeah, so we've, one of our patrol officers spends part of her time acting as our community engagement officer, which has allowed us to be involved in more of the community events. She has a schedule laid out of not only the city festivals and things like that, but also, job fairs. She goes to the schools, serves lunches with some other officers from the local cities to the kids to try to get that positive interaction, especially when kids are young. We're also participating in the Shakopee Academies program to allow students interested in law enforcement, criminal justice to come learn more from us. We'll work with those schools or the students to provide some information and some maybe realistic perspective of what this type of career looks like. But it's little things too. We do coffee with a cop in pretty much every city where it's an open invitation to the community to come to Hy-Vee, for instance, or a local coffee shop and sit down with local police officers and sheriff's deputies to just engage in conversation. We also do our youth catfish derby, things like that, where we're engaging the youth and having positive interactions with law enforcement rather than negative interactions so that we can develop the trust of the community, participate in Esperanza Festival, things with, try to bring in diverse cultures that we may not be as familiar with, and try to reach out to them to build those relationships so that they can know they can trust our officers and our law enforcement here to provide them the service that they deserve. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely.
It's actually bled down to us now even. I mean, we recently had, one of the local high schools has a criminal justice class, and they've come in and toured and asked a lot of great questions. And it's refreshing to hear students, because it's more from the perspective of wanting to get involved in the criminal justice system, and not a lot of people know about the jail side of it. And so it's really been, it's been nice. In fact, we have a tour scheduled for tomorrow morning, so looking forward to it.
All right, so yeah, looking on page 3 on the next steps, this completed jail study. What kind of insights do we hope to gain from doing a study like that?
I think we are at a position now where we're taking a look at our service model in the jail, and we're gonna reevaluate that to see if there's any changes that we need to make to provide better service to the people in custody, as well as to our staff. And in doing that, we're gonna go look at other jails in the metro area in Minnesota, but also take a look nationwide to see what kind of new initiatives or programs other jails are using that have been successful, and see if we can integrate those into our facility to help with various challenges that we have right now.
All right, Jill, can I ask you, you've been really carried the lion's share of the work to pull the data for this presentation together today. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to some of the data collection challenges that you had and that we can think about going forward, like as we get better at pulling data. And
well, it's really a matter of our program and how it works, and our reporting abilities in our current program. I wasn't able to run very specific reports. Rather, I would just have to run a generic report and then go into each and every case to find out residents and venues and stuff. So we are working on developing a new program to better assist with the reporting abilities for the future. So hopefully in the future we can have better statistics, and that we can just run for the whole year and then there it is.
easier access.
Yes.
And so your system and the system corrections uses and the system that law enforcement uses are not the same?
Correct.
We're really grateful for the work you did around that. Thank you.
In addition to what you already have, what sort of new data would be valuable from any of your perspective if you could get at it, and then what would it take to be able to get at that sort of data?
Well, I do know that our court administration department also has a program that if I did need assistance, I could ask them to also assist in the gathering of this specific data. I don't know to what extent, but if need be, I could command the help from them as well.
Jill, does that new MCAPs that we're going to get eventually solve some of these issues?
Yes, it will.
So we are getting, the case file management system that we currently have is called MCAPs. And we have a old version right now, and they're working on a brand new version, which we'll hopefully get. When are we supposed to get that?
Well, a couple years.
So, we're a little behind right now, but this new version is supposed to be the next greatest thing for us, so hopefully that'll help us with this data analysis.
Great. Great.
I'd speak just to that for a minute too. I know that for us, I mean, this whole thing about county residency, I have found as going through this process about how important that is, not to us, but to the other resources that would be available to people. And I mean, for corrections staff to have easy access to that, to be able to answer that simple question when we're seeking resources or wanting to help them by just saying, are they a Scott County resident or not, would be really valuable.
So there's some pieces around our data collection that we have a chance to look at too through that jail study?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that the panelists want to ask? Otherwise, we're going to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. All right. Can we turn it over to the audience?
please.
I'll jump in quick. On the data collection as well, some of the data we collect is collected for instance, the state, so the Department of Corrections. So our booking numbers or our population ADP, we call it, that number is what the state wants, so we provide that. But as Lieutenant Redke pointed out, that number goes up and down. Well, it's based on our borders. So we've pulled out the numbers ourselves on, so for instance, if you go to slide, I think it was 10 on the population, you know, what the actual Scott County inmates are. No, I'm on the wrong, I don't know the actual number. It's whatever the jail ADP is, 11? Yeah, so you can see those spikes, but in retrospect, if we pull out, for instance, the amount of borders we have, we can kind of figure it out based on the revenue. You'll see the numbers tend to grow about 2 to 3 a year. So like 14, we had 126 Scott County residents, 15, 127, 16, 130, and I believe in 17 it was like 135. So it grows 2 to 3 to 5 each year, but what we report to the state is just the total number we had in custody, and that's how they look for the data. So that's the other complicating factor is we have to provide this data to the state, so that's what we provide, but locally it doesn't do us a lot of good sometimes. So those are some issues we struggle with.
Other audience questions?
This really isn't a question, but Lisa Brodsky, Public Health Director. We just finished wrapping up the community health assessment for the county, and for the first time, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs rose to like the #1 health issue, and not just with youth, with adults too. So your data really supports the fact that drugs are becoming a very serious issue in our county for adults as well. So even the community is recognizing it, and they're seeing it as well. So I appreciate reading your data. Thank you.
I just had one general question. So when you were looking at the recidivism data on that, and the likelihood or the frequency in which people are committing new offenses within 3 years, do you also look at within that, like the number of times that people are committing new offenses? So, you know, the situation where someone may be committing misdemeanors, but in the course of 3 years, you know, they may have committed 15 of them because it's, you know, connected to mental health or substance abuse or other issues and stuff like that, versus, you know, the more serious crimes, which typically have a much lower recidivism rate because in part they're also incarcerated for a longer period of time.
I'm not sure.
So when you're looking at these, when you're looking at the recidivism rate and stuff here, do you also look at if it's just a singular offense that people commit again once, or do you see a lot of the people who do commit new offenses committing them multiple times?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they track that. I just know that this is for people that have been discharged, and then they look at it for the 3 years in 6-month increments, and then it's for a new felony. So I'm sure they probably do track that. I'm not aware for sure, to be honest.
Any other audience questions? All right, we return it to the board.
Great. Colleagues, questions or comments? Commissioner Ellerick.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. I noticed that there's about 25% reoffend and about 25% have no job. And I'm just wondering, you know, the correlation there. And I'm kind of wondering what happens. Somebody commits a crime, they do get to society, they serve their time or whatever. What do we do to help them reintegrate into society? I'm thinking of that, you know, job, no job, and also in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of something that was in the paper within the last couple of months. County commissioner in Hennepin County was attacked and clubbed with a baton and so forth. And he was a few years later, I don't know what the length of time between the event and this, he was appearing on behalf of the person seeking an expungement, which was kind of unusual because I think he was still suffering symptoms from his attack that was years earlier, but he was still supporting that young person. Well, I'm wondering about that process too. Expungement, do we speak regularly against them vigorously, or can people that maybe merit an expungement get it? I know it's a tremendous barrier for housing and employment. There's a whole class of jobs you'll never get with expungement. So I guess I'm wondering about what are we doing? We're talking about preventing crime, but it was 25% of reoffenders. We got to figure out how can we achieve better results there.
So you're asking about expungement?
Well, it was just kind of what happens when somebody leaves.
Oh, sure,
I mean,
okay.
I also have in the back of my mind with drug court, we sort of, it's probably not the right term.
Treatment.
Treatment court. We surround those people with all that they would need to be successful. Well, that's a select group of a small number.
Sure.
But the people that are now leaving jail or prison or whatever, how are they helped to reintegrate into society? And then the expungement, if they're worthy of that, I don't know, with the process. I was just reading the document they have to fill out.
Right. So, I mean, for probation, it's twofold. We have those individuals that are on probation that are in the community. Obviously, when they're in the community, we're helping them build those both formal and informal supports to help them be successful. So whether that's housing, jobs, all the stuff that we talked about before. When someone comes out of prison, they're coming out on supervised release. Same idea, they're transitioning to the community, so we're really trying to figure out what are those needs for those individuals. Do they need chemical dependency treatment, mental health treatment, housing stuff? Obviously, we've talked about that. That can be a huge barrier. But the probation officers are working with those individuals as well. When they come back to Scott County, typically they have some type of support here, whether they have housing of their own or they're living with family members, friends. And again, it's the same focus, trying to address those needs so that they can be successful. As far as the expungement goes, that's a court process.
It is a court process. People file a petition and ask that the court expunge their record, which means take it off so you can't find it anymore. I think it makes prosecution more difficult. I like to know what people have done in the past. It makes it more difficult, but the state has made it increasingly more easier for people to expunge certain crimes in the last few years. It used to be more of a judicial remedy, but now there's more statutory law on it, making it easier for people to get rid of certain crimes. But we always send somebody to court to represent the office, sometimes we don't disagree with it, sometimes we do.
Thank you. Commissioner Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe this is a question on page 10, kind of a technical question. But we're looking at the number of felonies, I think it was. You're on mine too. Excuse me. And what I want to know is, in putting this slide together, felony and gross misdemeanors by location here, thinking of Mystic Lake in particular, they have one of the most phenomenal facial recognition software programs, and oftentimes will identify people on their premises who maybe have outstanding warrants or are wanted by other jurisdictions. Does that help drive up that number, or are we only counting people who reside in Scott County who get picked up at, for instance, Prior Lake at Mystic Lake?
Well, that would count, our statistics would count anybody that we have charged in our office, regardless of
where they live.
Regardless of where they live, and it just happens to be that number.
It does. Okay, so there, and I've heard it mentioned before by other law enforcement that the security apparatus at Mystic Lake has actually been very beneficial at kind of catching people that we're interested in detaining.
It is very beneficial. In addition to the surveillance system and their own security force, they also have a license plate reader. When you drive on to the property, they can tell pretty quickly whether that's a car that has a flag on it for being stolen, and then they'll focus in on it. They'll follow them by surveillance into the casino. They'll call the Prior Lake Police Department, and they'll come out and apprehend them. Obviously, that's another way that we get increased prosecutions.
Thank you. Second one is a little more esoteric or philosophical. When we're talking about mental health, we're concerned about not criminalizing mental health, people afflicted with mental health issues. That's important. That kind of is a given that we're working from. But I'm thinking about a very particularly violent case at the Mall of America this week, where the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, obviously has some delusional problems and some serious mental health issues. I'm trying to think about how to phrase the question. When we consider public safety and mental health, are we attaching some sort of severity index to what is going on? So there's people we should truly be afraid of that may have some mental health issues versus people we're just kind of annoyed with or concerned about that have some mental health issues. Are you understanding the concern I have about using mental health as a blanket excuse almost to decriminalize things that we probably don't want to decriminalize? How do we draw that line? Where's that discussion right now?
Commissioner Beard, I think that's a question that comes down to my office's prosecutorial discretion, where we look at a case and decide what the crime is, who committed it, and then figure out at that point what this individual's needs are, what the reason for the crime was, try to figure that out. And you're right, something happened at the Mall of America, obviously that individual has some kind of mental health issues. How could you not do that, correct? Right. But you also don't turn a blind eye and say, oh, he's got mental health issues and not prosecute him. He should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And then you deal with them as far as his in custody, as far as how you try to treat that person. So I think that's an issue that we deal with on the front end as far as my office and our discretion on how we charge a case, how we might settle that case. And from that point, if we charge them and prosecute them, then it would go to probation, and they also have tools that they will implement to figure out what the needs of that individual are and try to get them the treatment and the help they need. So at the front end, it comes to the discretion of my office and how we deal with that. But yeah, you don't use mental health as a blanket to basically not prosecute somebody. So he's got mental health issues, so let's not do anything with that person. You got to deal with it. You can't decriminalize everything just because someone has mental health issues. To be honest with you, probably the vast majority of people that are in prison probably have some sort of mental health issue. It doesn't mean you don't prosecute them and send them to prison. It's all very case specific and individual specific.
And if I could clarify as well. Certainly. The decriminalization, for instance, our jail doesn't mean we put less people in jail. It would mean that we have more resources that they don't end up in jail always. So example would be we may arrest somebody for a domestic or for assaulting somebody in their house or tearing apart their living quarters, but that might be the result of no resources where there have been police calls. Starts out with my son's gonna take his medication, 2 weeks later, he's acting weird, saying things are off the wall, and now 2 weeks after that, we're there arresting him because of a domestic occurs, for instance, where Canvas Health or other resources in the community can maybe help stabilize a person, get their meds corrected, so they don't end up in jail, is kind of the, I think, more accurate way to talk about it, in that more resources would prevent people ending up in the system because they could get some help they need earlier on.
Madam Chair, thank you. I know the answer might have seemed obvious to those of you that live with it every day, but to those of us that think of it on high-level policy issues with money, staffing, things like that, I just wanted to hear that discussion and have that on the public record, that we do consider it. Just from the synopsis I heard is case by case. Sometimes the mental health intervention is after the fact to prevent recidivism or increasing severity of actions or things like that. But it's, to be clear, it's not an excuse to avoid prosecution for things that we're truly afraid of. Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions or comments? Well, I just have a couple. For a lot of our data, we just have data from the cities, not the townships. I realize we have less of our population in the townships, but do we not have that data? Do we not have that available?
I think maybe Jill could answer that.
Just recently, they have added the townships as an option for us to include with our reporting.
Right.
So within a couple of years, we could definitely put together some statistics within the townships.
Good to hear, good to hear. Thank you. If there's no other questions, I really thank the panel for their work on this. Thank you for pulling together the data. I want to echo Chris's first comments about this collaboration and this data that we're really seeing for the first time from the attorney's office, from the sheriff's department, from the jail, and from community corrections. This is really wonderful, helpful. I think makes us all think about policy and budgetary initiatives and things we need to do. And finally, I think congratulations are in order to Himani. I see that she got second place in the state speech meet in discussion. That's a huge accomplishment. So congratulations and thank you, everybody. All right. I think we're going to have a recess real soon. If we could just move on to consent agenda, and the two other things on the agenda will be recessing for a fun little celebration. We're going to move on to the consent agenda. I'll read the 14 items on the consent agenda. These are items that have been previously discussed, workshopped, and work done on them. Item 7.1, to approve the request for rezoning, preliminary plat, and final plat of Buffalo Ridge Second Edition, Stephen Geis applicant, and Scenic Estates LLC owners in Section 36, Spring Lake Township. Item 7.2, approve the request for preliminary plat and final plat of Thomas Acres Second Edition, Martha Hoover applicant, and Mary Lou Thomas Family Trust owner, consisting of 5 lots on 77.54 acres in Section 5, Newmarket Township, and a development agreement. 7.3, approve the renewal application for a Scott County precious metal dealer license for Samuel D. Rockney, doing business as Excel Pawn and Jewelry for 2019. 7.4, approve the renewal application for an intoxicating liquor license for 2019 for Castle Kitchens, doing business as the Minnesota Renaissance Festival in Louisville Township. 7.5, approve the renewal application for a 3.2 malt liquor license for Scott Carver Threshers in St. Lawrence Township for 2019. 7.6, approve an on-sale wine license with Strong Beer and a 3.2 beer license for Wild Oaks Ranch Vineyard Winery, LLC in Newmarket Township. 7.7, approve amendment number 1 to the cooperative agreement with Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, and Washington counties for children's mental health crisis services in the 7-county metropolitan area. 7.8, authorize application for and acceptance of grant funds from the Minnesota Department of Human Services for a whole family approach to systems change in an amount not to exceed $400,000 per year from July 2019 to June 2024, which includes the addition of a 1.0 full-time equivalent as a project coordinator. 7.9, adopt resolution number 2019-048, amending the 2019 to 2020 Aquatic Invasive Species Plan and the Natural Resources 2019 budget. 7.10, adopt resolution number 2019-049, authorizing an amendment to an agreement with Kimley Horn and Associates for design consultant services for the County Highway 83 reconstruction project in the city of Shakopee. 7.11, adopt resolution number 2019-050, awarding a contract to BSI Mechanical Incorporated for the boiler replacement at the regional training facility. 7.12, to approve record of disbursements and approve claims. And those are 7.13, adopt resolution number 2019-044, reappointing James L. Henches as Scott County Surveyor effective June 1st, 2019 through May 31st, 2023, and rescinding resolution number 2015-149, and 7.14, approve payroll processing of personnel actions. Those are the items on the consent agenda. Are there any items that you would like to be pulled for further discussion?
Madam Chair, I would just like to make a brief comment on regard to 711. I don't need to pull it. That item is for boilers at the regional training facility, and the money is actually coming from the regional training facility. It will be reimbursing the county, so it's not county funds, it's regional training facility funds.
That is correct, Madam Chair, Commissioner Ulrich. The CIP does identify those funds as coming from the Joint Powers Regional Training Facility.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Beard.
Madam Chair, I'll move the consent agenda then as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the 14 items on the consent agenda as presented. Any further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Let's move on to item 8.1 to adopt resolution number 2019-052 proclaiming April 14th through 20th, 2019 as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week in Scott County.
Madam Chair, could we recess very quickly to reconfigure the room? There's a whole bunch of people
Oh, they have
waiting
to
to
come
come
in
in.
for the reception.
Yeah.
I was just trying to be efficient. I'm sorry. Let's, thank you. Just, let's reconfigure. Let's recess for just a couple of minutes. We have everybody waiting to do that. Just 3 or 4 minutes, please. Thank you. Yeah, no, I was just thinking, we have this big recess.
Office, and this morning it's my privilege to ask you to adopt Resolution 2019-052, proclaiming this week as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. Before I talk about our dispatchers and the great work that they do, I just want to highlight some information about our dispatch center for members of the audience and those who don't know. Scott County runs a 911 center for all of Scott County, including areas in New Prague that are actually in LeSueur County. So we cover the whole area, and there's one consolidated center. We have a total of 17 FTEs, 17 dispatchers. We have 4 supervisor positions, and we operate with 911 24/7. So weekends, holidays, nights, whenever there's a problem, whenever someone needs help, 911 is available there for them to reach out to. We measure our 911 center based on 2 national standards indications. One is our call answering time. The national standard is 90% of 911 calls are answered within 10 seconds. We've been meeting that standard for a number of years. One of the things that is unique to us is that unlike a big city where a 911 telecommunicator will answer a phone call, stay on that phone call until the phone call is done, our dispatchers have to prioritize. So if they're on a phone call and someone's reporting a non-violent action or a non-emergency, we actually oftentimes have to put them on hold to answer an incoming 911 call. So our dispatchers actually do a really good job of triaging real time what's going on. We do sometimes get complaints about how often we have to put people on hold, but that's part of the reality of what we have to do to maintain that standard. So we are maintaining that standard, but we're doing it with an asterisk by putting people on hold. The other standard is the speed in which we dispatch fire departments. Again, the national standard is within 64 seconds, we are dispatching out 90% of fire calls from the time we receive that call. And this is actually a big challenge, and this is an area we're not meeting the standard in. We're actually sitting about 50% of the time we can get that done. We're working to improve it, but oftentimes what happens is callers will call saying there's a fire somewhere down the street, and we don't have a lot of good information like an accurate address. So that delays our ability to do that. The other reality is that we often get surges of calls whenever there's some kind of a structure fire or a house fire. We can have hundreds of phone calls on a big fire. And with the limited number of staff we have, with constant 911s coming in, it's very difficult to know when to stop answering 911 calls and let those go and get a fire department paged out. So it's a real challenge we're working on. But those are the 2 main indicators. And obviously there's big impacts on how those performance indicators impact the community. When people call 911, they expect someone to be there, to be professional, to know what they're doing, and to provide very quick service. Maintaining that 90% threshold is critical for us, and that's why we are willing to put people on hold. And the fire times dispatch, the second indicator, all of our homeowners insurance have a fire rating, and 10% of that fire rating is actually based on the 911 Communication Center performance. So when we get the phone call and get the survey, we're required to provide what is our call taking times on average, and like I said, we're meeting that standard in that case. And then we have to report what our fire dispatch times are, and we're not meeting the standard in that case. So there's a big impact. We know fires double in size every minute. So the quicker we can get people started, the quicker we can get help to that scene. And then on the back end, our homeowners insurance rates and our commercial insurance has a big impact on, you know, how quickly and what our performance levels are. So we do our best, but staffing is always a challenge. The 911 centers around the metro continue to have a greater than 30% turnover rate. Part of that is a large number of people who have really good hearts and want to do the job, but they just can't perform at the level that we need them to do. Really good people who, you know, they want to be able to help the community. They want to do the job, but this job is such a difficult job. We require a very high level of multitasking capability, communication skills, memory, things that are, quite frankly, not that prevalent in the environment. So we really have a challenging point to hire people. Around the area, there's so many vacancies that we tend to lose candidates to other areas if they're not residents of Scott County. We, in our last process, just lost a candidate to the city of Bloomington, and it came down to who's got better benefits, Scott County or Bloomington, and the person lived in Bloomington, and they proceeded with Bloomington. Unfortunately, we put a lot of investment trying to find that right person, and sometimes it doesn't work out. We do staff using a lot of data. We have call history. We have a ton of data in our 911 system. So we actually have call history down to how many calls we get by the hour, by quarter. At 3 in the morning, we don't get that many phone calls, which would make sense. Most normal people are sleeping. But when we do get phone calls, they tend to be really bad. We have a peak phone rate at 4 p.m. till 5 p.m. on Mondays during the summer, which seems odd, but we actually have 72 phone calls per hour on average during that 1 hour. So you can imagine we have to up staff based on those hours, and we reduce our staffing down to a minimum of 3 during the I can't say quiet. Well, I just did. Someone's probably swearing at me right now on the video. That is the ultimate jinx for 911 center. So we up and down staff based on where the actual call volume is. When someone does become a new dispatcher, it takes on average 16 to 17 weeks of training full-time before they're proficient to be self-sufficient and operate on their own. This creates a huge challenge for us from a hiring and retention standpoint, that it takes a very long time to get a new employee onboarded and fully ready to work solo. So we have a lot of challenges. Bottom line is, this is a job that most people can't do. We have a lot of great people in the community, but most people could never be a 911 dispatcher. The people we get truly are devoted to the community. The amount of public service motivation amongst our staff is quite frankly amazing. You know, people could get more money elsewhere. They could work Monday through Friday jobs. When we hire them, we can promise a career of working nights, weekends, and holidays. And you know, the county talks about total rewards, and it's a big value for us, but our staff members don't even get dinner break. They work and they eat while they're working. You know, the benefits of things like yoga and going out and walking, and we can't have our staff members just get up and leave. And you can see in the audience, we don't have all of our dispatchers sitting here because we're still running 911 as it goes today. We don't shut down for anything, whether it be a snowstorm or anything. We never close. So 24 hours a day, we're there. Talking a little bit more about the devotion of our staff, they really are a great group of people. The amount of self-sacrificing behavior, I mean, these are people who will come in at the drop of a dime if we're getting overloaded. Their families are amazing at helping them accommodate and work around and support them as they come in on really weird shifts and at short notice many times. And the amount of empathy and compassion that our staff demonstrates is, again, it's unprecedented. You know, our staff is the first voice that somebody hears when they're calling for help. They are the critical calming factor that keeps us a civil society. At the end of the day, people know that someone is going to be there, is going to listen, is going to be there, going to be compassionate, going to be empathetic, and someone's going to hear their concerns and take care of them. And that's a really an important anchor to keep this a great place to live. People know that, even though not many people can do it, people know that there are people there 24/7 ready to help. We also asked some really challenging things from our dispatchers. You know, they are expected to know what a police officer or a firefighter or a paramedic are thinking. So many of them don't have that history. They haven't been a police officer for 20 years. But the officers will expect, if they're going to a domestic call, if they're going to something else, the officers will all expect that since that officer can think that, hey, I want to know this information, the dispatcher should know that. So we asked them to come in without having that direct experience and to be able to think ahead and use shared experience to learn what's important and how to gather the correct information to keep people safe. It's really an amazing group that our public safety telecommunicators are in Scott County, and I'm honored to work for them. So today I'd ask the board to adopt Resolution 2019-052, declaring this week as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, and to honor those members of our staff who work so diligently to support all of our community.
Thank you, Scott. Definitely, I think it would be our honor to adopt this resolution. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt resolution number 2019-052, proclaiming April 14th through 20th, 2019 as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. Discussion or comments?
Madam Chair, after we pass this resolution, we should give them a thorough round of applause for their work.
Definitely we should. Other comments or discussion? I just want to say and just echo so many things that you said, Scott. These staff members save lives every day. They make a huge difference in the safety and culture of our community. I can't imagine the quick, thoughtful judgment they must use every minute of every day. And we're very fortunate to have such good staff, to have this dispatch center to serve the whole county. And I really do think this is important, and we should honor them every day, not just this one week in April. So any further discussion on this motion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to item 8.2. A reason many of you are here to celebrate one of our wonderful, long-serving staff members, and so we're always a little sad at this time, but very, very happy for the retiree. Vice Chair Commissioner Beer is going to start us off on this matter.
Tim, come on up here. Come on up. That's what we're all waiting for here, right? Sorry, you got me. Sorry. You know, I was going to start out by saying I was very excited when I found out I was going to be able to read this, but I didn't want people to misinterpret like I was, happy to see you go. That is not the case. I'm excited for you. So we've condensed your career, just like maple syrup, takes a whole lot down into one, and it's like 2.5 times times. I don't know if I can get through this, but here we go. Tim Cleveland is retiring after over 42 years of work in community corrections. If this is what 42 years of corrections looks like, Lori, are you in here? I need an application promptly after this. Make it look really good. Tim started with Scott County Court Service as a probation officer in October of 1977 and was with us for almost 12 years. Tim left Scott County for what he thought were greener pastures with our county neighbors to the east. His career did flourish in Dakota County, despite it being Dakota County. That's sidebar. Tim was hired as a supervisor for the misdemeanor unit in April of 1989 and later went on to supervise both the intake and juvenile units there. In 2000, Tim was promoted to Deputy Director of Juvenile Justice Services, and then in 2003 to the Adult Service Deputy Director. Tim remained with Dakota County until he saw the light and returned to the truly greener pastures here in Scott County. I don't know who wrote this, but I like it. I like it. He returned to Scott County as a Community Corrections Director in June of 2013, and it is here where he's finishing his career. Scott County has been fortunate to have Tim as a Community Corrections Director over the past 5 years. Not only is Tim knowledgeable of community corrections, but he's a respected, positive leader. Tim has done an exceptional job managing the department and was instrumental in the development of reentry program and the treatment court in Scott County. During these 42 years in the field, Tim has become somewhat of a legend in community corrections and other areas, but we're just going to leave it there. His vast knowledge and experience has made him a leader amongst his peers. Tim has served as president of the Minnesota Corrections Association, the Minnesota Association of County Probation Officers, and most recently the Minnesota Association of Community Corrections Act Counties, MCCAC. In 2018, Tim was the recipient of the Jack Young Award for exemplary service to the field of community corrections. Some of the highlights from that nomination that embody his work in this field include furthering the mission of community corrections for over 40 years, being a long-term member of MAC-CAC, providing significant contributions even before he became the director of Scott County. I think you were there so long that it's now the MAC-CAC LMNOP, I'm not sure, but a long time nonetheless. He's been a strong proponent of better technology for corrections professionals to enhance their efficiency. Not only has Tim been a great leader for his employers, he has been a phenomenal mentor to countless professionals within the corrections field. Tim is someone who has dedicated his career to serving the community through his work in corrections. But there's more to Tim than his career. He's been married to his wife Lisa for 25 years and is a doting father to his 2 daughters, Brianna and Callie. Did I get those right? Mm-hmm. Tim would always be the first to cheer them on at their soccer games or whatever activity they may be involved in. In addition to his family, Tim is an avid golfer and fisherman. He has also been known to be quite the handyman and is hoping to renovate a lake home in his retirement. So is that barbecue for 2020? We'll give you a little bit of, so we're all invited now. So now, after 42 years in the corrections field, it's a pleasure to honor you, Tim, as you move into the next chapter of your life. Awesome. So, one page. This all came down to one page. If I were to write this, I would have said, Tim Cleveland, awesome dude. So on behalf of the board, our staff, and the people of Scott County, we got a nice plaque for you, just in recognition of your service. Thank you. Thank you so much. Awesome job. 17-minute speech.
Thank you, Commissioner. First, want to thank my family for being here. My wife, Lisa, and my 2 brothers, Howard and Jerry, and my 2 sisters, Kathy and Susan, and their husbands. I feel very, very fortunate to have started my career here in Scott County back in 1977, before some of the staff were born, which they remind me of. And then to be able to come back in 2013 and finish out my career. I am so thankful to the staff in Community Corrections for their hard work and dedication to what is a very difficult and challenging job. They are amazing staff, and they make my job that much easier. I have really enjoyed working for Pam. Thank her for all her support. And I have really enjoyed being part of the Health and Human Services Management team, which I think is one of the best in the state. I've also enjoyed working with many of the staff here in the county, some of who are in this room, and I want to thank you for your support and assistance over the years. Had a lot of emotions the last few weeks. It's kind of bittersweet. I've enjoyed working here in Scott County. I think it's a wonderful place to work. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to serve the citizens of Scott County. And I will miss all of you, but I will not miss the drives into work in the morning when it's 25 below and snowing. So thank you so much.
I think we have a few other people who'd like to make some comments. Come on up.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Is this when the roast starts? I forgot.
Well,
You know, we did all the nice stuff already, so we might have a little dirt on Tim. No, I'll start out nice anyway. As Commissioner Beer indicated, Tim has dedicated much of his career to serving the public through the community corrections system. Over the years, he has proven to be a skilled leader, a support and advocate to staff, and someone who's willing to take on new initiatives. In the past 5+ years, Tim has been a leader of innovative programs here at Scott County, such as the treatment court, the reentry program, and crossover youth. I feel fortunate to have partnered with Tim on the original board strategy work around mental health starting in 2014. It has really been that original work that has helped the county move these initiatives forward. But that's really enough of the fluff from me. So I'm sure folks are wondering what it's really like to work with Tim. As most of you know, Health and Human Services is dominated by women in the workplace. So not only has Tim spent most of his adult life living with women, but he has been faced with a group of supervisors and an HHS leadership team that is dominated by women. Let's just say that doesn't seem to have been a problem for Tim. He fits right in. Although Tim enjoys all forms of music, we have seen him bebop to tunes that can only be loved by tween girls. I have also been told that although he enjoys an occasional football or basketball game, his favorite TV shows are actually Real Housewives and The Bachelor. People magazine is his favorite reading, and he is always ready to share the latest gossip with us. As our resident expert on pop culture, Tim can share details of any chick flick out there, new or old. Tim has also been our creative genius in the management team. When tasked with a team building exercise, Tim was the first to run to a craft store for supplies and props. And as many of you know, for Gary's retirement, Tim was the mastermind behind our own special version of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. The management team will truly be at a loss without your creative talents, Tim. Tim, I believe I speak for many of us. We have all been privileged to call you a colleague and a friend. You truly have left your mark on Scott County. Your soft-spoken demeanor, your collaborative work style, and the reviews of the latest chick flick will truly be missed. Tim, I hope I speak for many of us. We all wish you well as you move on to this next chapter.
Would anyone else like to make some comments? If not, no?
I just want to add to thank him as well for his professionalism and appreciation of his best practices and data and his discussions. He's been a huge supporter of Scott Delivers and working with different groups. The other place that I've really interacted with him is in Justice Steering. And he has been such a rock in that group. He and Doug and Perry and looking at data and trying to bring things forward for that group to look at. And he was always there and always willing to meet and support and try to find ways creatively to improve what we're doing. And his support through the treatment court, I was kind of on the outside looking in, but I remember sitting in a meeting with him and Gary where he really talked about we had to do it right. Everybody had to go through the training. Everybody needed to know how this worked. We weren't going to do it half-baked. The training, the mental health, the addiction, the law enforcement, and it was so important that we put that all together. And it's made such an impact on people's lives in this community. And because of your leadership and vision, I think that that really moved the board and Gary to do that. The other part, though, is personal. About the only time I've ever won a golf tournament, I was playing with Tim, and I think Tony's here as well. Man, and walked away with so much fun up there with Gary and Tim. And I was also lucky enough, I whined because I don't get to go fishing enough, and he must have felt sorry for me. So he took him out on a Saturday morning to O'Dowd with he and his sister and just had a wonderful morning fishing. And I'm hoping you the best, that you get to fish and golf here moving forward way more often than you have. So thank you for your professionalism and your friendship, and really enjoy your time.
Tim, there you are. I couldn't see you. On behalf of the board, on behalf of the people of Scott County, thank you very much. The work you and your department do is so important, often overlooked. We don't think about it, but the work you do to really help people get back on track. These are people who are our friends and neighbors and are citizens of the county, and it is so valuable. So thank you. Thank you for also always reaching out beyond your department and being willing and able to see the big picture and help other departments work together to get to the best end and do what's right for everyone here. So thank you very much. Sad to see you leave Scott County employment, but very happy for you and very excited for your next adventures. With that, we're going to take about a 12-minute recess, go and have a little bit of celebration. We're going to take some pictures. We'll be back here let's go right at 11 o'clock. We will reconvene the meeting. Thank you very much. County Board meeting, and next on the agenda is item 10.1. We have Joe Wida.
Oh, good.
This is a good one.
Ready to pepper him with questions, Madam Chair.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. So it's another bid package as part of our overall construction going on. The warm storage building was a result of the space study as it relates more to the present and future equipment needs of the county. And as a result, you know, we all know we have several pieces of equipment that currently do not have inside designated storage. Pretty critical equipment that doesn't have the inside storage. Two of them being our tow plows, the semi and lowboy trailer, and also our excavator. Excuse me. And these are just a few of the larger pieces of equipment that do not have the designated spots. During the winter months especially, and now that winter is 7 months long, seems to be a little bit more, this really gets to be quite cumbersome, keeping the equipment out of the elements, and a lot of time spent, you know, jockeying the equipment around, which in turn causes significant delays in our response times. You think of police, you think of fire. Fire is a prime example. The fire stations need to get the trucks out now. Realistically, we are a 24/7 operation out there as well. Just the other day, we got called for an ambulance. They couldn't get on a call. It was on a township road, but as you know, the townships can't respond as quick as us, so we do respond to some of them to help out. 3 different pieces of equipment that needed to be moved before we could get the truck out to plow the road. And this is just not turn the key and go. It's the truck's got to warm up, they got to air up, and then get pulled out. So, so Wold Architects, along with Kraus Anderson and our staff, have been working on the design of this 14,600 square foot building. And April 4th, we received 42 bids for the project for 8 different packages. So today we're asking you to approve the contract awards to the 8 lowest responsible bidders for a total of $2,546,510, which is approximately $700,000 below our engineer's estimate for this portion. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Great, thank you. We are glad to hear that last part. Yes, Commissioner Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Joe, and this is a serious question. I'm not messing with you now. This is, on the fire suppression part, base bid, give us the brief description of a base bid. Alternate number 2 took a bunch out, and we're awarding I assume we're awarding the bid without alternate number 2 in there, or with alternate 2 in there. Can you just give us a heads up on what that is?
Sure, just give me 1 second to flip to it here. So the fire suppression, so we bid it 2 different ways. One with a dry chemical system.
That would be the 435, I assume?
Correct.
Okay.
So then the alternate 2 was a wet system, which includes the wet, a pump,
Oh,
and a
because
tank.
it's a heated building now, you can go with water.
Correct.
Got it, okay.
And because of where our water supply is, also played a factor into that. You know, we've had to look at options of drilling another well. With this option, with being able to go to the wet, we're gonna have a storage tank right on site and a pump and a wet system.
Good deal. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Joe.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, I would make a motion to adopt resolution number 2019-051, authorizing the Central Shop Warm Storage bid package.
And I'll second it, Madam Chair.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to adopt this resolution. Any discussion? The only item I would mention is, in looking through these bids and things, it was nice to see the kind of the benefits of our decision to have a construction management service, so that these were bid out. Some smaller contractors are able to play a role. Some local contractors are able to play a role. I think it's nice to start seeing the evidence of that decision, and that's what we wanted, so that was good. Any further discussion?
Well, that is 700,000 underestimate.
Yeah, that too.
It's mainly that.
All right. Any further discussion? All in favor of adopting resolution number 2019-051, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you, Joe. All right, we'll move on to item 10.2. Actually, I think this will probably be 10.2 and 10.3, and Paul Nelson will be presenting.
Morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners.
Morning.
This is an item related to the Scott WMO that I tend to come to you every year. We don't really have to do this. We are required to submit an annual report. But you being the board, I figured you ought to be informed about it and bless its release. So a copy of that was included in your packet, and this was reviewed together with the Watershed Planning Commission before it came to you as a draft. Still says draft on it. If you do authorize us to release it, we'll move the draft and send it onward. But as part of that, I just wanted to take a moment and give you a little bit of some high points for the year. This will be rather brief because in May, we're going to be back for Scott County Delivers, and in that we'll see some of the data results as well. So I'm going to tend to try to be rather brief today. But what we do in this is I try to cover a little bit of some of our measures of how much we did, how well we did, and is anyone better off in that theme of Scott County Delivers. And I'll go a little bit through the financials at the end of 2018. So in terms of how much, that's just kind of quantity of things. And there, in terms of capital projects, we only had one capital project this last year. That was to basically reduce the amount of sediment coming off of this slope on Sand Creek. You can see those log piles in the background there. That's what we constructed. Those log piles move the flow away from the toe of the slope and reduce the amount of sediment coming off of it. Kind of shifts the creek away from that. So that was our one capital project. And then in terms of the technical assistance cost share projects, this is what we do together with landowners, where we provide some technical assistance and financial assistance. All total, we did about 60, or approved 63 new applications. And you can see the funding split there. Altogether, it was a little over $1 million toward this program. That includes both the staffing and the construction of the practices. Staffing does cost quite a bit, and we pay the SWCD to do that because there's a lot of work when you're dealing with private landowners. It's rather labor intensive. But all total, locally between landowners and the WMO, we funded about half that program, and we were able to leverage about half of it from state and federal dollars. One of the interesting things that we see in the results from this year's, ultimately we want to switch from doing practices that correct damage from flow. We want to minimize the number of gullies that we're repairing and so forth. And we want to move on to protective practices. And what we see in this table here is we're doing a lot more protective practices. over 40 of these practices are protective types of practices rather than repairing damage. And I think part of this is we're finally getting away from all the damage that was caused in 2014 with the presidential disaster doctors, and we can get on to these other types of practices. And also part of it is acceptance by landowners of doing these other types of practices. So that's kind of a good news type of thing that I see in this data. And then in terms of aquatic plant treatment, we had scheduled last year to do treatments on Cedar, O'Dowd, Thole, and McMahon Lake. We only did Cedar and McMahon because when we did the early season surveys of aquatic plants, we didn't see the invasive species in O'Dowd and Thole, and therefore DNR didn't allow those treatments. But again, we cost share this with a local partner, the Cedar Lake Improvement District, and in this case, they paid more than half. Part of that was because early part of the year, we'd only budgeted to treat a small portion of the lake, but DNR and the Cedar Lake Improvement District came back and wanted to treat most of the lake. By then, we had already set our budget, and so the Cedar Lake Improvement District agreed to pay the extra to do that larger treatment. And then usually in terms of how much, we look at how much levy we had, how much grant dollars we had. Levy increase last year, and going into this year too, was about 3.5%. So a small amount of increase, but you will see a drop off in grant dollars. Some of the grants that we have received are now sort of winding down. So we don't have as much grant funding. We'll hopefully this summer get back into applying for some more grants. In terms of how well we're doing, we have a couple measures of effectiveness and how well we are doing compared to the budget. In terms of effectiveness, we do track what it costs us per pound of phosphorus, one of the pollutants that we're trying to control for those tax practices. And this year it went back down. Last year was kind of high. We usually tend to have a couple very efficient practices that sway that curve. We didn't have it last year. Got back on it this year, so it's back down to that kind of long-term average of about $60 per pound of phosphorus. I know this is inside baseball, but $60 a pound is very cheap compared to, in metro areas, they pay about $5,000 a pound because you're dealing with parking lots, utilities, all that kind of stuff. When we're dealing with agricultural areas, we have space is much easier for us to work with. In terms of revenue coming in, bottom line is we had budgeted about $2.1 million. We came in about $60,000 less than that. Not exactly the same as what we anticipated in all areas. Looking at the Bowser watershed funding on the fourth line there, we did a plan or a budget amendment in September last year to include that funding. That was a new grant. We didn't move as much as I'd hoped. We only got 11,000 back, partly because it took long for Bowser to get the contract to us, and so therefore I couldn't get started on some of the work until we had the contract. Also see that the EPA grant, which is the fifth line, we had revenue of 83,000. We had budgeted 200,000. Part of that's because most of that's those tax projects. We had them approved, but they didn't get constructed, and then we don't get reimbursed until they're actually constructed and finished. So that has been encumbered, but not yet reimbursed to us. And then we also had some revenue, the bottom line, other miscellaneous revenue. We had two of those tax projects from a few years ago that actually the landowners canceled. And so the SWCD reimburses us the money that we were forwarded to them. Bottom line is, the revenue came in pretty close to what was budgeted, but in different places. In terms of expenses, it's kind of a similar story. We had budgeted a little over $2 million. We came in about $1.9 million. The big difference there was in our land and water treatment program, where we were about $100,000 lower than what we had budgeted. Most of that was sort of labor that we didn't use. And then the inventory and assessment program came in at $68,000. That's the sixth line on there versus we had budgeted $132,000. Most of that's because of a joint study we're doing with Jordan, where we reimburse them at the end, and they haven't produced the end product yet. which will speak to why we have the budget amendment as the next agenda item, is to roll that forward, that expense forward into 2019. So the bottom line here is that we had actually revenues of about $160,000 more than we had expenses. That goes into our fund balance. Fund balance at the end of the year for the WMO is about $460,000. Is anyone better off? Very quickly, of course, the practices that we do with landowners do help them control those gullies, or in the case of wells, seal those up, protects groundwater, benefits them. In terms of responses in the resources themselves, this is McMahon Lake. We track this kind of information also for Cedar and O'Dowd Lake, and more recently Thole Lake. But it's what we call trophic state parameters. Those are those things: phosphorus, the clarity of the water, and chlorophyll A, which is a measure amount of the algae or the green slime that's in there. While McMahon Lake in 2018 met the water quality standard for recreation, it was just barely. And you can see the purple line there going up. That's phosphorus, has gone up now for a few years. And you can see the dark blue kind of decreased a little bit too. So that's the clarity of the water, decreased a little bit. But the standard for clarity is 1 meter, and McMahon Lake is still about 2 meters average clarity. That's pretty good. But it's getting close to, again, not meeting the standard. And we saw similar types of things in some of the other lakes. Phosphorus generally went up in most of the lakes last year. So. Then in terms of, we got some very new data. This actually came to us this spring, where we have some trend analysis on what's going on in Sand Creek. And there we have some good news in terms of the TSS, that's solids, that's sediment, is going down 57% since 1990. Similar decrease in phosphorus, but chlorides is going up. This is all not surprising. Our management has really focused on sediment and phosphorus. We've only just last year started to do some things with chlorides. So it's kind of good news telling us that some of the efforts are working. And then rural wells, we get some, so this is kind of a picture of groundwater results. We sold, it was actually 73 test kits last year to residents. No nitrate values over the standard. We also, Melissa did a special study. We had 34 wells that we had distributed across the county, so we had a good geographic distribution. Again, no nitrate issues. There was also a nitrate clinic where residents could come in. 115 came into the SWCD, had their water tested. We don't get the results on that, but that's, I want to relay that more people get their well tested than what we just do. But we had an issue with arsenic. In that new test of 34 wells, Melissa found that 17% of the wells tested had arsenic over the drinking water standard. We dove into that a little bit further, and this is brand new data from like earlier this week, where we combined those 34 wells with all the data we could get from the Minnesota Department of Health, where they have new wells are tested for various parameters when they're drilled. And you can see we have a cluster in the middle of the county there that's red, where arsenic is over the drinking water standard. So as a staff level, we have put together, and I'll relay more of this, an effort to inform those folks, encourage them to get testing, and also to get some information to them on how they can maybe treat their well water as well. We'll also technically, we'll dive into that a little more to see if, is that just because it's the wells, those wells are at a unique depth that they're pulling from the same aquifer that's naturally high in arsenic. We don't believe it's a pollutant. We believe this is natural. Arsenic is used, or historically been used as a pesticide for orchards, treating wood, but we don't have a strong clustering of orchards in that area that's more likely and naturally high. And they're actually finding across the state that the same percentage, about 10% of wells are naturally high in arsenic. So we'll be exploring that more. But anyway, that's basic information I have for you on 2018. And as I said, the Watershed Planning Commission did look at this, and they do recommend its release. I'll stand for any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Nelson? If not, do we have a motion to authorize the release of the 2018 annual report and newsletter?
So made. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to authorize the release of the 2018 annual report and newsletter. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. On to item 10.3.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, usually about the same time I come to you to amend the budget for the WMO, because as we close books on the previous year, there's things that roll over, or we can get more precise with some of the numbers. This table was included in your packet, and I'll see if I can zoom in on certain parts of it. I think in general, or maybe Deb can zoom in, it's fairly simple. On the revenue side here, which is the top part, the fourth line, the watershed-based funding, we're recommending budgeting a little bit more of that funding. That's a grant that we have that we can spend over 3 years. Last year was the first year. 2019 will be the second year. And as I mentioned before, or I'll mention a little bit later, is that the tax program, the Technical Assistance and Cost Share Program, we're at an all-time high in terms of landowner interest. We have already encumbered all of this year's money for applications.
Wow.
So we wanted to increase a little bit this so we can take a few more applications and get them in the hopper. This is reimbursement, so we get reimbursed after a project's completed, but we think we have the interest to do that. So we're recommending increasing that just a modest amount. The next line, the Bowser Targeted Sand Creek Grant, moving that down a little bit in terms of revenue. What we had before was based on what we thought the end of the year would come in. We actually had paid out a little bit more at the end of the year in 2018, so that the $191,000 is actually the balance of the grant that's left. So it's a more accurate number. And then also on revenue, the EPA grant, which is, I think, would be the sixth line, there we're moving that up. As I mentioned, in 2018, we were way below what we had budgeted there, but we've encumbered those projects with landowners. We just don't have them all constructed, so we get reimbursed. A lot of those we anticipate will be built this year, so we'll get the reimbursement. So that goes up. Bottom line is really only about $11,000 increase in revenue once you balance all this out, from about 2 million to about 2 million, if you round it. So on the revenue side, then administration, I'm anticipating about the same. Major changes are really in the land and water treatment program, where under cost share and incentives, you can see we're bumping that up a little bit. Some of that's that money from increasing the dollar amount from the watershed-based grant that I talked about, taking a little more revenue out of that grant, because it's 3 years and we had just divided up 3 years. And we're also have asked for an amendment in one of our current grants to make available another $8,000 for practices. And as I said, we already have demand that has consumed pretty much the dollars we have available for this year. And then the aquatic plant management, very minor change there. We just have actual quotes in, so I can put the actual number in. And then technical assistance, we did have one invoice from one vendor from last year that didn't come in before the books closed, so that rolls over to this year. So basically an increase for the land and water treatment program from $471,000 to $1,503,000. Under public education outreach, we have an additional $1,000 there. The cost for paying for the lab services for our volunteer monitoring went up a little bit. Then under inventory and assessment, we have a final invoice on a survey we're doing in Minnesota. It's only University of Minnesota, only $800. The major item is that flood damage mitigation study, which is still ongoing and for which we won't reimburse them till they're done. So that was budgeted last year, needs to be moved forward into this year's budget. Then I did change one of the studies, McMahon Lake Outlet, from 30,000 down to 20,000 based on actual bid. We have an engineer under contract, and that's the actual bid cost now. Bottom line is that instead of total expenses of $2,131,000 and some change, we have total expenses of $2.205,000. That means that we'll be using more from fund balance. Instead of using about $151,000, we'll be using $213,000 or $14,000 from fund balance. But we had a healthier fund balance starting because of 2018. So we're starting at $460,000 in fund balance. That'll leave fund balance of $247,000, still better than what was approved in December. And a footnote there is that this grant that we have for Sand Creek, we'll have completed 99% of the work by the end of 2019, but we don't get the final 10% grant payment till March. So we will get in March about $220,000 final payment on that grant. That'll move that fund balance back up into the $400,000 range. So this amendment has been reviewed by the Watershed Planning Commission, and they do recommend approval. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Well done as usual, Madam Chair. I'll be happy to move to adopt resolution 2019-053, authorizing an amendment to the Scott Watershed Management Organization's 2019 budget.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to adopt resolution number 2019-053. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. All right, we're on to 10.4, to consider resolution number 2019-054, authorizing the renewal of the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement for a 3-year period beginning May 1st, 2019.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and Board. I'm Joyce Arl, and I'm the Business Services Manager in the IT Department. I don't think we've presented to the Board about our Microsoft licensing for many years. I think maybe 2010, so it's been a while. It's probably a good time for an update and to explain what we actually do with Microsoft here at Scott County. In 2000, I'll have to learn how to.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. In 2004, the IT department put together a 5-year plan with new strategies, and part of that strategy was to establish a formal technical architecture because it was viewed as critical to meeting the ongoing financial objectives of the county, as well as the county's emerging view of having access to any service, anytime, anywhere. And I think that continues today. The methodology continues to support the county's objective to provide innovative and efficient programs and services, and the strategy to invest in technology so that everyone can increasingly perform their county business anywhere, anytime. So those words have been prevalent for many years. Microsoft has helped us get to where we are today, and it will help us get there into the future. Our early research in 2004-2005 timeframe led us to select and identify Microsoft as a technical architecture platform and software provider. In 2004, the board approved the first Microsoft Select agreement, which was at that time a combination of licenses and software assurance, which means maintenance, giving us the ability to stay current on versions of software. as we move forward, over that was the initial contract terms were 6 years, and then in 2010 we renewed, and we went with what is called an enterprise agreement, which broadens the scope out to include additional licenses, volume discounts, licenses, license and software assurance, and it also expands it to support our current technical infrastructure with new subscription-based licensing, Azure cloud hosting, training services, and some consulting services. So over the years, we've continued to progress to the latest Microsoft offerings so that we can stay current and maintain our standards. Partnering with Microsoft has allowed us to not only centralize procurement and manage one contractual arrangement, as opposed to in years before we had various different contracts that we managed. We also, we also got volume discounts. We get to lock our price in for 3 years on all of our individual types of licenses. And then we also get, as I mentioned, the additional training and planning benefits that were not included in the earlier contract versions. As we began to convert from the third-party technology providers, we further reduced spending on third-party software while continuing to simplify our operational footprint. As we began transitioning from the different third parties into the Microsoft platform, one of the first things that we did was we converted from a third-party antivirus program to antivirus program that is included in the Microsoft licensing. We gained the same functionality but at a cost savings, and then operational efficiency by having less complex technical platforms, fewer vendors to manage, and standardized management consoles. I lost my place, I'm sorry. As time went on, we also converted we have what we call virtual servers, which mean servers used to be a box with licenses on it. Today we have a box with hundreds of servers and hundreds of licenses on them. Those are called virtual servers. So we moved from a prior third-party licensing model to the Microsoft model. That also helped us gain efficiencies, and that was actually at a greatly reduced cost because our prior vendor was very expensive compared to Microsoft. Another thing that we were able to do is we went from various different vendors for databases to a single database provider, which is Microsoft. We also, over time, implemented system management tools and Azure in the cloud, that's Microsoft's latest ability for us to host our systems in the cloud. I'm going to switch the screen. One of the first things that we were able to host in the cloud was our Exchange, which is for email. Our email servers have been in the cloud since around 2012 or 13. That was a part of implementing Skype for Business, which at the time was called Lync. That was we transitioned a 20-year-old legacy phone system to use the Lync technology in Microsoft. In order to do that, we needed to move our Outlook email to the cloud. So that moved all of those files that used to be saved locally on servers into the cloud, so that now we don't pay extra to store it there. It reduced some of our needs for storage locally, which is an expense that another expense that we saved over time. In 2016, Microsoft reduced the terms of their contract, so we no longer had to enter into that 6-year contract. They went down to a 3-year contract. So now, every 3 years, 2016, 2019, and 2022 is our schedule. When the last renewal in 2016, we changed our licensing model to the licensing model going to the future, which was the subscription model. That brought us Office 365, all of our licenses now for, I'm kind of jumping ahead. So all of our licensing for Office 365 and Skype for Business, those are all now subscription licenses. So they go from year to year, just like a magazine subscription was. When we no longer, if we should no longer desire to have those, then we can cancel at the end of the year. So I'll just kind of roughly go through this to give you an idea. I've hit on a couple of them already. So what's included in our current licensing agreement is server and cloud licensing model, which gets us to our server and cloud, virtual servers, the Azure cloud storage and databases. Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite includes things like identity authentication. That's what we're doing with two-factor authentication, and I know that might be a dirty word for some of us. It has increased and gave us a little headache, but it is something that that is intended to secure our systems. Analytics and application and device management are also a part of that, as is data encryption, which we are now employing on almost all of our Windows 10 laptops. The Office 365, as I said, includes Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of your normal business applications that most people use on a daily basis. But it also includes things like OneDrive, which is going to be, that's a future place to save personal documents in the cloud, not on local servers. You'll be hearing more and more about that as we go forward. In addition, then there's also SharePoint licensing, which provides for a lot of our file storage and our collaboration tools, software maintenance and support, training and planning services. So because we have this enterprise agreement, we are entitled to 30 training days for technical training that usually costs about $5,000 a week. Then that's included in our licensing. And then we also have up to 20 planning service days, which is consulting time that we can select a Microsoft partner to help us identify a plan to implement new technologies, and that's also included in this enterprise agreement. I think you've probably already heard of some of the direction where we're headed in the next couple years. One is moving SharePoint to the cloud and upgrading to the latest version. At the same time, we'll be working on upgrading to Office 365 and with the new functionality that brings. There will be a Skype for Business upgrade for our telecommunications in the next year or so. As we transition to these, we're moving to a hybrid infrastructure where some of our data and our systems will be located in our server room in the basement, and some of them will be hosted in the cloud as a part of our licensing agreements with Microsoft. Another thing that we'll be implementing later this year or early next will be mobile device management. That will enable us to, right now when county cell phones, we set those up manually, each one. It might take up to an hour to do that. A part of the Intune product that comes with Microsoft allows you to automate that, and you can manage large numbers of, and automate the delivery of the setup of those devices. So that's going to be a huge time savings when we get that implemented. So the new contract agreement in 2019 to 2022 is $428,720 per year. That's for the bundle of all of the services and the applications that I've talked about. That's an 11% increase over the 2016 agreement. One of the things that we did as we went through this agreement was as we went through this renewal, we evaluated all of our licenses, how many of this we have, how many are we actually using, to make sure that our numbers matched, that we either had enough to cover the consumption that we were using, or that if we had any extras that we weren't using, we reduced those. That actually helped offset and maintain the cost increase to 11%. About 50% of the 11% price, about half of the 11% increase actually was due to additional licenses that we had to buy when we upgraded the server SAN in 2017. We added additional capacity in that area that required more licensing. And the other piece that cost additional licenses was bringing the library system into our Skype for Business phone system that was done about a year ago. And that caused us to add them into some of our licensing. So those additional licenses actually took up about half of our increase. So it's probably a 5 to 6% actual price increase over what, and that's fairly standard in this type of a software arrangement. There's no significant changes in the agreement structure with Microsoft. We partner with SHI, which is a local Microsoft partner who negotiates a contract with the state of Minnesota. So this is based on state of Minnesota negotiated pricing, which is actually, we attempted to get price from other vendors using different contract programs a couple years ago, and we found out that the price difference was 15 to 20% higher trying to go away from the state contract. So we're quite confident that that pricing is realistic. This year we actually did invite a second Microsoft partner to provide a quote. Their price was a couple percent higher, and then with the additional operational expense of trying to change vendors and making a transition, we decided that we would go forward with our current partner, SHI. The funding for this is included in our 2019 operating budget, as it will be each year to follow. So at this time, I tried to add a slide this morning and it was too late, I think. At this time, I request that you adopt Resolution 2019-054, authorizing renewal of the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement for a 3-year period. The total 3-year amount is $1,286,160, with 3 annual installments, each due in May, of $428,720.
Wonderful, thank
Madam
you.
Chair, I'll put forward that motion.
All right.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt resolution number 2019-054. Questions or comments?
Just one question. Did I hear that so our server room, the racks are getting thinner and thinner, it seems like. So are some of our servers that are cloud-based are part of this agreement that do not run the Microsoft suite of products? Just a point of clarification, just for my own.
I'm going to look to Jeff on this.
Can you clarify your question?
Yeah, so the question is, are we paying for basically cloud servers, what I'll call it, to run other applications as part of this contract other than the Microsoft suite?
Not currently. In the future, that is definitely a possibility that some of the servers we have running locally on virtual servers could move to the Azure cloud. We don't have any of those today. What we're running in the Azure cloud are either Microsoft servers or like our Active Directory servers, Exchange, those types, but they're all Microsoft today.
In direct support of the Enterprise Suite, okay. Yep. Just point of clarification is all. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments? Yes, Leslie.
And Chair, Joyce, the one you handed out this morning from the one that we had, was the amount reduced? Did something change?
It was reduced. We were still attempting to get a final quote when the deadline to submit the RBA materials was upon us. So the original, our original quote that we were going with was we knew was the highest possible amount. It was $458,000 a year. Is that something like that? As we finalized where the library licenses needed to sit and how many we needed to buy and increase, and reduced a couple of things that were like to have but can wait a year, because we do have the ability to add new functionality next year. There were some things that we knew that we weren't going to get to this year, so we took those out of the quote and made it more realistic to what we actually can implement this year.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? All in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
We will now move on to committee reports and commissioner updates. If my colleagues will humor me, I'm going to go first so I can head out to another meeting quick, and Commissioner Beer will finish the meeting. I have two items I want to report on before my committee reports. One is, I think you all saw the letter to Margaret, Commissioner of Department of Transportation, about the restriping, thanking MnDOT for the restriping and asking them to leave it. Just wanted to put that on the public record, but also thank Commissioners Beer and Ulrich, because I know that you've worked hard on that over many years. This isn't something or a topic that has just come about as lately, and with all the maybe publicity in the last couple weeks about it, I think people have forgotten that the county's been working on that for a long time. So wanted to publicly thank you for that, knowing that we're still going to continue to work with MnDOT because of that tremendous difference the restriping has made for our residents. The other item is that we did send a letter of support for the grant for Veterans Court based on our discussion at the last workshop. And then as far as my activities the last 2 weeks, on April 2nd, I attended Belle Plaine Township meeting. It was the first time I had been there since they had 2 new supervisors, so it was good to meet them. On April 4th, Justice Steering Committee, mostly discussions about changes that need to be done with just the operations and moving people in and out for court, knowing that our employee lunchroom has been turned into a jury assembly room. Lots of people it's going to be difficult and to transition, but it'll be worth it in the end. Also on April 4th, attended Helena Township meeting. They were awarding bids for the year, so it was good and interesting to be there for that. On April 5th, I attended the Adult Mental Health Initiative meeting. April 8th, Commissioner Randy Malushnek from Carver County asked to meet with me and some staff to begin some discussions about some potential shelter options for victims of domestic violence. That was just a very preliminary discussion, brainstorming meeting that we'll be continuing to work on. You'll hear more about. Also on April 8th, attended the Cedar Lake Improvement District annual meeting. On April 9th, the county administrator and I met with the mayor and city administrator of Belle Plaine. And later that day, I attended the AFSCME meeting and also had my meeting with the county administrator. April 10th, I attended the Shakopee High School Academy's steering committee meeting. On April 11th was the St. Lawrence Township meeting. Good to be out there. A lot of discussion again on roads and trying to get them back in shape for spring. And then finally this morning before the board meeting, I had a meeting with Pam Selvig to just talk about legislative issues around health and human services. So that's the end of my report. I'm going to excuse myself and turn the meeting over to Commissioner Beer.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See you. Commissioner Ulrich. Okay, I have a abbreviated report because I was out of town. April 3rd, I attended the Parks Commission. The 4th, my monthly meeting with Leslie Vermillion, our administrator. Also that same day, Fish Executive Committee. And on the 5th, the Scale Executive Committee. And we're obviously working on presentation to scale, kind of a refinement process, revisioning, a reboot, whatever you'd like to call it. You were going to have your first session, which was more of a historical perspective on scale, and that got snowed out, and so that'll be in May, and then there'll be another one after that. That's the process. That's the end of my report. Thank you. Commissioner Beard?
Mr. Chair and colleagues, I left town right after the last board meeting to close up shop at our where my wife was wintering. And so I got home last night and have nothing to report, except there was one email chain that I was copied in on regarding the restriping of Bloomington Ferry Bridge. It seems to indicate MnDOT is aiming at the weekend that includes July 12th, unless something else happens to set things back. So you heard it here.
See what you can do.
We'll see what we can do. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the 2nd, Market Township. On the 4th, County Road 27, they had an open house over at Clear Lake Park. About 20 people came out there. Most people are like what's going to happen out there. On the 8th, Planning and Zoning. And then after that, the Cedar Lake Improvement District had their annual meeting. On the 10th, the Metropolitan Emergency Service Board met. After that, I had a short meeting with the MMCD, the Mosquito Control District Manager. On the 11th, the Elko New Market City Council had their meeting, and they have a new chief of police. His name is Brady Jewell. He comes from Chaska, so he's got a new chief over there. On the 14th, Cedar Lake Township had some big frost boils out there. I think they're about as big as this room and 2 or 3 feet deep of just mush, like clay and just junk. So the county's going to help them clean up some of those spots out there and provide some material. Last night I was at Prior Lake City Council meeting, and I did attend the Trump rally, and I guess it was okay. I probably wouldn't do it again, but it was okay to do once. So that is my report.
Thank you. For my report, I took a page out of your books, and since winter was over, my bride found some cheap flights to Florida, so off we went, just in time to get home for more winter and several meetings that were snowed out. But in between there, I was able to get to the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed on the 9th, and then on the 10th, part of our Live, Learn, Earn, and was hosted at the Prior Lake City Hall. Batsy, or I think they call Housing First, gave their presentation to the group with the whole Woodbury and the Supreme Court. Just how do you manage infrastructure in a growing town? So it was a good first step to hear from them firsthand from their point of view of how they see things, and seem to want to have a very open and dynamic relationship with the jurisdictions that have to shoulder this. So we will see how it goes. It was a good first step and a good meeting of the minds. And with that, County Administrator.
Thank you. Couple items. One, last night the Savage City Council approved the preliminary and final plat and the developers agreement for the Ertz facility. So that made it through the city council, and I'm sure coming up will be the groundbreaking and those types of things. So next Friday, April 26th, is Future Leaders Day. So there'll be all kinds of youngsters running around our buildings on that Friday. And then finally, a reminder that April 30th is our strategic planning workshop, the quarterly budget and beginning of discussions on the budget and the update from the annual from 2018. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you. Any need to recess for attorney-client privilege?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, there is no reason.
Thank you very much. Now, I know this next we could have a 2-hour dissertation on the meaning of adjournment, but that's where we're at.
Let's save that for another day.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned. Thank you.